Hello and welcome to Journalists Hangout UK. This is a show where we discuss issues both African and worldwide which are affecting the continent. We look at how those issues are seen at home and in the African diaspora. I'm Tamsang Majo, and I'm pleased to be joined by a distinguished panel. Afua Hesh, journalist, barrister and author. Lanre Akinola, editor of African Business. And Priscilla Nwipo, public affairs analyst. Welcome. Afua, let me start with you. We've got great news that Africa is putting billions of dollars into the space program. Should people be looking at that and be jubilating, or they should worry that that money should be directed elsewhere?
I think it's a mixed picture. I think a lot of people misunderstand what space programs are. It doesn't necessarily mean launching a rocket into space or putting a man on the moon. A lot of it is about trying to improve development on Earth, harnessing more data for agriculture and climate change. So I think, obviously that's welcome. However, I think my skepticism is that we already have quite a lot of data about what's happening, and it's not so far being utilized as effectively as it could to improve agriculture and policies around climate change. So I think that it's a really exciting area. I'm really pleased we're discussing it, but I think it needs to be taken with a pinch of caution.
Yeah,
I mean,
can we look at that? She's actually saying there's a lot of data out there, but should we do more?
I do agree with her to an extent, because indeed, when we hear Africa going into space, everybody is thinking it's about rocket launching, but it's not. Not purely solely about that. I think what we need to appreciate is the fact that currently it's being said that Africa missed the first industrial revolution, we missed the second, we can't afford to miss the third one. What is the third one? All about technology. And we must be on that train. And if we're looking at the technological aspect of things, within having a space program, then yes, welcome Africa.
Yeah, part of the argument could be that we started the space program. Lanre, let me come to you. Because when I was growing up, I was being told that our forefathers actually tried to get to the moon. It didn't work, but they tried. But now we are being told that South Africa is going to be the leading launch pad for the next big thing in space. How do you see that, Fanny?
Well, I'm assuming you're referring to the Square Kilometre Array in South Africa, which is the planned world's biggest radio telescope, which is actually an international it's an international project, which is exciting. Look, in terms of space exploration, Priscilla and Afua have, I think, really touched on the core issue, which is it's not just about, hey, getting a man on the moon or sending rockets into space. There are all sorts of real-world applications, from communications to surveying to conflict monitoring to weather monitoring and all of this, which is all hugely significant. But I don't think we should forget that there's also the bigger picture, the more aspirational picture, the sort of human endeavor picture of doing the impossible. And I think it's refreshing that Africa for once is not just waiting for the rest of the world to go and do it and then try and follow, but to say, well, why can't we be part of the cutting edge of technology? I think it's an underrated opportunity, and it's encouraging.
I quite like what you say. The biggest telescope is going to be in South Africa. Well, that's my area. That's southern Africa. So Priscilla, it's the biggest. Let's not have even a debate. It is the biggest
that South
telescope.
Africa can't do this without the help of Nigeria.
Yeah,
so we're not going to go into our parts of the African continent per se.
It's a radio telescope.
By the way,
distinction.
Thank you. But I will say this: one of the things that I think Africa really needs to leverage on, with the space program, is their human capital.
Yes.
That we are very fond of exporting our human capital, and a lot of the space programs around the world are actually, believe it or not, abled by Africans who are engineers and who are experts within this area. When the US, for instance, I say a few years ago, but a few years ago, when they were dropping out of the sky each time they tried to go into space and they were falling apart, it was actually a Nigerian. I know I say that so loosely. It was actually a Nigerian who was said to have come on board and worked with their space agency to prevent that, and he was able to do that. I actually met him once, Professor Augustine Esugbe. He's retired back to Nigeria and wanting to contribute to the development of Africa, to share that knowledge that he has and those skills. So I think if Africa is able to harness on individuals like that, I mean, we will not be lagging behind in any of this.
Of course, there's so much happening around. Afua, let me come to
I wanted to pick up on what Priscilla was saying about human capital, because I don't know if you've seen the film Hidden Figures about the 4 African-American women who played actually a pivotal role in the US space program. I don't know how much of a contribution Africans have made to European and American space programs, but I imagine it's significant. You know, we have all this talent in the diaspora that's been working away on other countries' space programs.
Let me take you back and say the Apollo project, as it were. The main person behind that was Egyptian.
Exactly.
Farouk Elbaz, he was the person whose knowledge was actually used to make a determination, where are you going to land, what are the conditions, and he trained the astronauts that were actually going there. So
and I think part of this is about identity, about a kind of Africans having confidence that they've already played a huge part in this innovation, and there's no reason why we can't do it on the African continent. But one thing I just wanted to mention, looking at the countries that do have space programs, you mentioned Egypt is one of them, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. It's really interesting that no Francophone nations except Algeria is the only Francophone nation that has a space program. And why is that? It makes me think more about the kind of bigger patterns of colonialism and relation, because it's almost as if they are not standing on their own 2 feet and driving this innovation forward.
They don't have control of their finances. That's the unfortunate thing with the Francophone countries.
And this is where it really starts to show.
This is absolutely, because in order for them to be able to, commence their own space program, they need to seek permission from France, and they need to seek access to their money that is banked in France.
Okay, hold on to that, because I want to get to Landra about something. She did mention countries like Algeria, and we know that Islam has played a role for centuries in terms of what happens in the space project. And now we are seeing all this investment going in.
You mean in science?
In science,
right.
In general.
Look, we're talking around one of the great things about space exploration, which is it brings people together rather than divides them. We've spoken about the different nationalities and ethnicities that have contributed to making things happen, right? And this is the point I made earlier around human endeavor. And this is something that few things are able to do in this kind of fashion, right? Because it's a challenge that's bigger than all of us. And for me, I'm less sort of about, hey, Africa in space. It's nice to be part of that, but I don't think, it's not about, oh, Africans must take the lead, isn't that? No, as people, as humans, as a species, this is the sort of thing that it's a rare occasion when we come together rather than divide each other. And there's too much of that going on. So if it can contribute on some, I know this is
I've
not that
never heard you sounding so warm and fluffy.
That's because
before.
we've never spoken about space exploration.
This is the power of space technology.
This is exactly. But Afua, I know that in Ghana their telescopes are not as big as the South African one, but they are still doing.
It's a radio telescope.
But they are pushing.
Zimbabwean as well, not even South Africa.
This is my area. No, remember even that Zambian teacher who tried to start up a space program. They're important things. But Ghana,
yes,
but
if you're going to borrow on South Africa, I'm going to borrow on Nigeria because they're.
But of course,
well, they want to put astronauts by 2030 in space.
I think that's feasible. I mean, look, Ghana has a space program. It's invested in the last government about 15 million into it, which it's a lot of money for a country like Ghana in the scheme of things. It's not enough on its own to kind of have a transformative space impact. But there's a centre in Koforidua in the eastern region. There's lots of research going on. They are already collecting data about farming and climate, and it's already being used. So it's a good example of how a country that isn't one of the mega powers on the continent can, with sensible investment, harness some really useful results to improve productivity.
But what Ghana has been able to do is attract investment from the Japanese, and probably we have seen the Chinese talking about Nigeria and the prospects there. Is this the agenda for other people, or it is an African agenda?
No, of course it's an agenda for other people, as well as an African agenda. It's not just solely an African agenda. Just running up on what Afua is saying just there.
No, not the telescope. Okay.
You are not going to have that telescope without Nigeria's involvement. We control things.
Fair to say there's $2 billion US dollars coming from Nigeria.
Thank you. How much is coming from South Africa?
Well,
we'll rest
the
that.
human capital.
As I was saying,
Okay, a bit distracted here.
it's anyway. Going back to the issue, the case in point. Yes, it is great if we're looking at the agricultural impact and data study and all of that. There is a question that we do need to ask: do we really need to spend that much money being in space in order to have that data? Because we can't pay for that data because it already exists. And given the kind of money that data, getting all of that with all of the space program is taking.
Can I just comment on this?
Should we not be focusing a little bit more
No,
on more
Landry wants to come in,
development?
but before
this radio telescope.
Okay,
madam.
In South Africa.
Before Landry, before you do, this is quite an important project. There's a lot of money going in South Africa. Of course, there are so many other countries. It's not only South Africa. It's an international project. But we also know that this is going to be the biggest data processing area. We can answer so many questions. That's positive, isn't it?
Yes, it is positive. I want to make a point on the value for money. Space exploration is actually quite cheap. Remember Curiosity, the car-sized rover that was put on Mars? Right. Do you know how much that cost, the entire project?
How much? Remind me.
$2 billion.
Okay.
There's a guy in Malaysia who's just spent $4.8 billion on a private yacht. So it's not.
When you put it like that.
No, so the thing is, like, if $2 billion gets you a car on Mars and $4.8 billion gets you basically a rich boy's toy, it's a question of priorities as well. If there's this underrating of the value of space exploration, of scientific exploration and scientific furthering. If you look at society today, the biggest breakthroughs in improvement of human lives have come through scientific discovery. Space exploration is a core aspect of that. So for me, it's like we're not spending nearly enough on space exploration.
I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with that. I am saying.
Okay, hold on, guys. Hold on, guys. I'm quite interested in this thing that Landry brought up, which is the value of money and where you want to put. No, but we want to take a quick break. But we've got more to discuss ahead. So please join us after a few moments, because these people here, the people that I'm hanging around with, want to talk about where the money should go. Hello and welcome back to Journalists Hangout UK. I'm Tamsan Ngajo, and I'm pleased to welcome back our panel, Afua Hesh, Landry Akinola, and Priska Mripo. Now, before we went to break, we were talking about Africa's space program and whether or not it is worth using billions of US dollars on that project. Now, Afua, you wanted, you sounded very passionate about it.
I wanted to respond to what Priscilla was saying, because she was questioning why we need our own space projects when we could just buy the data. And actually, I think that's part of it. I think we have been spending billions already buying data from private companies that are on the whole not African. And it's another example of how instead of just using money from precious budgets to spend to foreign companies, we could actually be building our own, investing in our own infrastructure and owning it. And as well as the immediate economic benefits, of which there are, as I was saying, for agriculture and population studies, there's also the psychological impact of knowing that you can actually start to own your own projects. You start then training a generation to work on these projects. And just to give you an example of how I think this is an investment. So in Ghana, I've done a lot of reporting on illegal gold mining, Galamsey, which has been destroying unimaginably large swathes of the rainforest, with predominantly Chinese miners coming in and taking out the gold and leaving long-term environmental consequences, putting mercury in the water table, as well as deforestation, depriving people of their livelihoods, health implications. Now, this is what's good and to be taken with caution about space programs. these satellite images can really help government see and map the scale of this.
Yeah,
before we had satellite imagery, you could still see the scale of it by driving around the country, and no one was doing anything. So I think the data can be really useful, but it's necessary but not sufficient.
Let me find out what, remember you were saying that Nigeria has got all these experts who are working elsewhere, who can be brought back home. These satellite images have been useful against poaching, against terrorism, and even searching the Chibok girls and all that. That is data that the Nigerians were asking for from the Americans and others when they could have been doing that themselves. The Chibok girls could have been found a long time ago.
Well, I think, because Nigeria has, have they not launched something like 4 or 5 satellites into space? So did they really need to ask America for the data if we're going to go along those lines? I don't think they did. The main problem here, which has always plagued us, is our will and ability to, be accountable for what we are doing. Much as I agree that, yes, it's a great investment for Africa, but are we going to own it at the end of the day? Or are we going to sign away a contract that just allows us to pay for things and other people own it, and we will engage other nationals to build and develop? And we are still, in effect, just paying for data in that manner. Whereas if we are, going to put these stations in place ourselves, and we put together a contract that ensures that Africa does indeed truly own it. That is where our problem lies, and we're not utilizing our human capital.
Let me stop you there. I wish we guys could hang out together more
a lot longer.
Yeah, but Landry, before we move on to something else that I want to talk about as well, we are looking at this African participation in space. Good news, developing a lot of engineers coming on board, inspiring new generations. Let me give you the final word on that subject. Looking forward, good news, but what else needs to be done?
Well, Priscilla is right in that it's going to come down to just how you manage it. The opportunity is there. Usually in Africa, things fall down because they're poorly executed. It's not because the potential isn't there. Very briefly, one thing we haven't talked about at all is that this is also a business. The global satellite industry is a $260 billion a year industry. Africa's internet penetration rates are at just 31%. A big part of that is going to rely on satellites. Africa's pay TV market is expected to hit $6 billion by 2021. 70% of that is reliant on satellites. So these are also commercial opportunities that can be tapped into. And by the way, the deal that Nigeria struck with China last week, it's a $550 million deal for 2 satellites. Guess who's paying for them? China, not Nigeria.
No.
Okay.
We always pay back. China ain't going to do that for free.
We will pay back. But there's something very, very, very important that I want us guys to discuss as we hang out before the Friday is over, before the weekend is over. And I want to direct that to Afua, because you are a prolific writer. And if Mo Ibrahim was to come to you and say, we are offering you $5 million US, stop writing, would that be something that you would accept if it's something that you love doing for life?
I don't think that's a fair question. I don't think that's a fair question.
Yes.
By the way, I would love Mo Ibrahim to give me $5 million. So if he's watching, I wouldn't say no, but I also wouldn't stop writing. I think I'm not a political leader, and part of the responsibility of being a political leader is that at the end of your term, you aim to leave your country in a better place and hand over to the next person who is democratically elected. That's the ideal. So I think you're talking about the Mo Ibrahim Prize, which hasn't been awarded since 2014 because they require leaders to meet certain criteria to win the prize. So they haven't been able to find anyone since 2014 who meets these criteria of responsible leadership, transparency, and handing over peacefully.
Okay, so what happens sometimes when that kind of money is not available? We have seen some certain governments offering packages to allow other leaders to leave. The case in point is my own country, where because this is the latest.
Is it South Africa or
Zimbabwe?
Okay.
In this particular instance, this is the latest president to leave power, and there's a very handsome, package in retirement that my former president Robert Mugabe is getting, with people talking about millions, Landry. So how do you see that?
Well, So the number I've heard is that he's got a $10 million package to go away and have a nice retirement. He's got dozens of people who are being assigned to take care of him, and a certain allowance of first-class travel every year, etc., etc., etc. It's the sad thing is that by African heads of state standards, it's a pretty modest package. The question is, should he be getting that kind of money given the circumstances that many Zimbabweans find themselves in? It's a difficult one because the transition that Zimbabwe is going through is very delicate right now. It is far from done. And what I read behind this is that the guys who are now taking over, they just want to make absolutely sure that there is no going back on what has happened. They want to make sure that Robert Mugabe just goes and lives out the rest of his life in peace. And it sounds to me like they want to protect his legacy. For me, the big question is, how do ordinary Zimbabweans feel about this? And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I suspect a lot of ordinary Zimbabweans probably aren't too happy about this.
President, you've been looking at how most Zimbabweans react. You've got lots of them around you. What's your take on this?
Well, I think it's subject to whose narrative you read, really. Some would say that he served his country for well over 30 years. And so there is a degree, there is something that comes with that. Whether he was ousted or he retired, whatever you want to call it. Every president around the world retires and they are well paid. Former President Obama will always have a security detail that's paid for by the state. He's going to have a handsome pension. All previous US presidents have that. We also have it here in the United Kingdom. Mugabe has 25 personnel that's been reported, subject to, again, where you read it. What is the big deal? By the time we add up how much the security detail we have to pay for those security details that looks after all those former presidents, and we have to add up all the monies that they will be receiving in pensions and others that we're not told about, all the secret private handshakes that go on, it will probably add up to the magnified figure that we're screaming about for Robert Mugabe. He has to go with a figure. That's just what his country offered him.
I don't think anyone's questioning whether Robert Mugabe, a long-time head of state, should have a pension and be taken care of. And there are security reasons as well as everything else why it's not practical to have a 93-year-old man who's been head of state, just kind of put up in some shack somewhere. I mean, obviously... How
much longer is he going to be around for anyway?
But I'm interested in the motive behind this package, because it is a generous package. I mean, Lamri's right, where in the context of the extreme and unique extravagance of African leaders, it could be worse. But, it's 24 full-time members of staff, 3 brand new cars replaced every 5 years, first-class travel, et cetera, for me, I'm wondering if... I know that we hear that there's a desire to not rock the boat, to make sure he stays out of power. But at the same time, some of the promises around immunity seem like they're already in question. So Grace Mugabe now is being investigated for corruption, I've read, because of her degree, her PhD, which she earned in less than a month or so. Okay. So there are other things happening that are threatening this new order. So I wonder... This deal that Mugabe's been offered, that can't be the only explanation.
Okay, yeah, so Landry, there are issues. Zimbabwe has a constitution that the country has to follow. The president is entitled a pension constitutionally and everything else, and his wife, if he was not to be around, will have 60% or so. These are constitutional provisions. But the main worry, and what most people are saying, is there is money available in a country like Zimbabwe, billions and billions, but in the hands of a tiny minority and not the rest of the people.
So, you make the point around constitutional, conditions. I suspect there are also all sorts of constitutionally guaranteed rights for the country's citizens, which are probably not as rigorously enforced as some of the constitutional clauses that apply to the country's rulers. Look, this is the eternal question. Do African leaders care about their people? And it is always difficult to argue that they do in a situation where you have people who can't feed themselves, who can't send their kids to school, and you have heads of state who are being chauffeured around in, $150,000 cars. So, like somewhere something is not quite right about that, right? And you don't need $10 million to live a comfortable life.
Okay, let me stop you there, Lanre. I want us to continue with this discussion, and I know that a lot of people at home and everywhere else within the continent will be discussing these issues. At least for us, we have discovered that the biggest telescope in the world is in South Africa.
Radio telescope.
And
with the help of
and that
nature.
is going to be helping out. But don't forget to follow us on Real JH UK on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Tamsang Majo from the entire team here. From those that are behind the scenes, goodbye and thank you for watching Journalists Hangout UK.